is the topic that I'm going to be discussing and going over. The reason why I'm bringing this particular topic up is that it permeates everything we do in wrestling. It's not just about selling, it's not just about storytelling, it's about how you conduct yourself in and outside the ring. It's how you make decisions based around your move segment. Everything you do in wrestling has some degree of psychology involved. Now, to explain why that's important, I'm going to give you a little bit of history. Professional wrestling used to be just that. It was wrestlers that wrestled professionally. Now, that seems confusing, I understand, but when you think of wrestling nowadays, you think of either professional wrestling or what they call collegiate/Olympic wrestling. They used to be the same thing. Amateur wrestling was broken down into one of two forms: freestyle or Greco Roman. Professionals were the ones that took both freestyle and Greco Roman and combined it into one form. That was the demarcation point. That's how you could tell one from the other. Professionals would not compete in the Olympics. They were strictly professionals, the way you would look at a boxer. Over time, professional wrestling lost its place as the premier kind of combat sport that people would watch. Now, when I say that, at the same time, the only other thing that existed was bare knuckle boxing. And this is based around class and money. The poor would be the ones watching the bare knuckle boxing because it was usually bet on. It was usually held in taverns and bars. There was no rules. It was basically you drew a line on the ground. Both men would toe the line. They'd put their toes on the line and then proceed to punch the fuck out of each other. That was as far as boxing went. The wealthy would pay professional wrestlers to compete at post-dinner events, and it was usually done in the parlor or someplace because it was a more scientific and in air quotes genteel form of combat. I'm not shitting you. That's how it used to be. What changed is that a professional wrestling match could run 4, 5, 6, 10 hours of just two guys in a clinch countering each other. Whereas once the Marquis of Queensberry, and Marquis is an actual British, royal, it's not even royal, it's like a noble rank. Once he codified rules for boxing, it went from being two drunk guys punching each other on a line to this, this air quote sweet science that we know it is today. It also established time limits and rounds so that in the same amount of time that you'd watch two guys in a clinch, you might have 12 boxing matches. So clearly, focus shifted from wrestling to boxing. The promoters of professional wrestling realized that they had a problem, and they needed to address that problem right now. Otherwise, their industry was going to die. It was going to go away. So they thought, how can we fix this? Well, we need to make the bouts faster. We need to somehow get this match done in a reasonable amount of time. Well, how are we going to be able to establish that? Well, they said, well, what if we know who's going to win? So that's where they came up with the idea of the predetermined match. And once that started, wrestlers realized, well, if we already know who's going to win the match beforehand, why don't we just make this a little bit of theater? We could jazz it up. And that's where you started getting the wrestling moves that we now know. Things like the Irish whip, the snapmare, drop kick, the body slam. Since you can already predetermine what's going to happen, you can work together to create something that will fool an audience into thinking that two men are trying to just absolutely murder each other when they're not. Thus is the beginning of psychology. Why you are doing something. And ultimately, everything I'm going to tell you is going to boil down to one simple question. Does this make sense? If you can answer that question yes, you're halfway there. The next question you have to ask yourself is, just because this makes sense, does this mean I need to do it at this point? If you can answer that yes, go forward. If not, hold it back, think about what you're doing. There's an old saying that slow is smooth, smooth is fast. That is absolutely paramount in professional wrestling. One of the problems with the modern industry today is that people are obsessed with this idea of, I got to get all my shit in. And that's where you get this term of flippy shit. You know, a guy, Paul was just even bringing this up. There was a match where a guy was given the Giants, the Giants swing outside the ring. He got slammed headfirst into the barricade and then slammed headfirst into the steps and then somehow miraculously made it back into the ring under the count. Why? You just got slammed headfirst into two really nasty objects. That's a perfectly legitimate finish. Finish the match that way. You can still tell the story later, unless you don't understand how to tell the story because you don't understand the psychology of what just happened. So when you are thinking about psychology, you have to ask if DJ Quick, right? We're going to say that DJ Quick here since you arrived. Thank you for arriving, DJ. If DJ Quick were to grab me, Derrick Zane, by the throat, lift me up into the air, and give me a choke slam, would anybody here believe that? Well, other than you, Quick. But the chances are no. Even though we all know that this venue that we're in, this medium is fake, digital, and anything is possible. From a purely logical standpoint, you would say a guy who's barely up to my hip, he can't even reach my throat, much less give me a choke slam. That's part of psychology. And this is one of the first things I'm going to touch on. It's one of these little unofficial rules that I live by and I try to stress to everybody. Big men should not do little man moves because little men cannot do big man moves, i.e., Quick is in no way, shape, or form ever going to be able to choke slam me, power slam me, power bomb me, any of that. The size difference is just too insurmountable. Now, I'm not going to take anything away from the athleticism of some big men. The one example that everybody always wants to throw at me is, well, Brock Lesnar did a shooting star press. Yes, he did. Let's not forget what also happened in that match. Brock Lesnar damn near killed himself by landing on his head on top of Kurt Angle's ribs. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you necessarily should. So when you're in SL wrestling, if you're a bigger guy than your opponent, if you're a big man or a big woman, don't do the little person moves. Don't do the shooting star press. Don't do any of that crazy high fly flipping stuff. Maybe a moonsault. And even then, I would say do it sparingly. You could just do a basic body drop, flying body splash. That's fine because it doesn't have a lot of athleticism to it. But generally, you shouldn't even hit that. You should honestly miss that more than you hit. That's a part of the psychology that's important. Understanding when to make a move, when not to do a move. When you are outside the ring in everyday business, how you dress, how you conduct yourself, that's a part of psychology. If you are playing a character that is intended to be super wealthy. All right, let's use the $1 million man scenario. And a gentleman that used to perform at one of the companies here. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to make anybody feel bad. But one of the companies that I was involved in here in Second Life, we had a guy whose whole gimmick was that he was a super wealthy guy, but he had raggedy, unkempt hair. He never shaved. He always had like stubble or beard. He wore ratty clothes, ripped up jeans. He looked like just some guy off the street. And if you're meant to be super wealthy, super high powered guy, why aren't you in a suit? Why aren't you cleaned up? Why do you look like a bum? Because why would anybody believe that you're supposed to be this thing inside the ring if you don't portray that outside the ring? Derrick Zane, right? The character of Derrick Zane. I don't dress like this simply because I like the suit. The Derrick Zane persona is a douchebag. He is an asshole. He is a bully that keeps failing upward in life. And because of that upward failure, it enforces his bad behavior into thinking, well, clearly I'm doing something right because look at all this money and success I have. So I just need to keep treating people more and more like dirt. There should be a certain degree of like style, but also swarminess to the Derek Zane persona, i.e., open shirt, sunglasses indoors, stubble but like weirdly cropped, like coiffed hair. Right? He should feel kind of slimy. He should look kind of like a dickhead. The look should go with the act. I'm trying to think of some other things that are important here. When you cut your promo, when you talk, either type or speaking, psychology needs to flow into that. If you are portraying yourself as a biker, because that was a thing. I don't know if it's still a thing. I'm sure that there's still a bunch of biker gimmicks here in SL. Throw in biker lingo and terminology. Talk about your horse. Talk about your club, whatever. But if you're portraying yourself as something and you don't speak the lingo, people who do are going to tell that you're not genuine and they will crap all over what you're trying to do. So that's another aspect of psychology. Selling is massive for psychology. And I know it's a very difficult thing for us to do in Second Life because we don't really have an easy means to affect facial expressions. You can, but you'd have to spend a lot of time screwing around with a HUD that you don't necessarily have a lot of time to deal with when you're in the middle of a match. But simple selling, if somebody slams you on your back, get to that sell HUD and immediately sell your back. Press that button. If you can't access it quickly, get a HUD that lets you access it quickly. There are HUDs that will do that. You gotta sell. And trying to think of the last more important things here, because that's kind of all the stuff I really wanted to hammer on. Make the things you do make sense. That is key, vital, probably the most important aspect of what we do. So, with that all the way, if there's any questions, ask. I will answer as much as I can until let's say 45 minutes. Yeah, about 15 minutes to one, so that people can go to the charity event today. So, if you got questions, ask. And the questions don't have to be about psychology; it can just be anything. Honestly, hopefully I pronounce this correctly. Aziza. I'm just going to assume that it's Aziza, and if I'm wrong, I'm a horrible person. That is probably one of the more difficult questions for those who are not here and will not see the questions. The question was, how often, if ever, should a wrestler change up their look gimmick to keep themselves fresh and interesting? That is a personal decision you will have to make for yourself. But I'm glad that you brought up the concept of gimmick because I like to address that. There's two things in wrestling. There's a persona and there's a gimmick. Persona is Ric Flair. Ric Flair is Ric Flair wherever Ric Flair goes. Persona is Undertaker. And Undertaker is easily boiled down to two things. And once I tell you this, I want you to understand this is not a slight on Mark Calloway. Mark Calloway is probably one of the greatest human beings to ever do this. But the Undertaker gimmick is essentially an entrance and he sits up. That's the Undertaker. So even Mark understood that he needed to change up his gimmick to keep himself interesting because he had let it run its course. But that was a personal decision at a time of his own choosing to change up. So there's no specific set amount of time. You just kind of got to play it by instinct. When you feel like you've gotten stale, that's the time you want to make a change. So always think about what you might want to do before that gets to that point. Because when you're at the point of staleness, trying to change through desperation is never the right time to do it. You want to kind of give give yourself a chance to really work it out in your head before you do it. Go ahead, DJ. You had a question. DJ asked, pretty simple, but during a promo, should I ever say something like, my opponent isn't a good wrestler? I wouldn't, honestly, and I'll tell you why. So everything about a professional wrestling match is theater. You're putting on a show, you're telling a story. And remind me to kind of sidetrack back to this because I kind of want to talk about the face heel dynamic and how there's only two sides to it. There is no three. I'm going to say this right now so everybody can grasp it. There's no such thing as a tweener or a neutral. You're either on one side of the coin or the other. I will tolerate no arguments otherwise. But specifically, you don't want to make people not have an interest in what you're doing. The idea with the promo is that is your opportunity to get people interested and to put their ass in a seat. And the reason why you want to put their ass in a seat is because they're going to pay for that seat. Because again, the term is professional wrestling. You want them to pay to see you. Now, granted, here in SL, there's very few groups that do that. It's very difficult. But you still want to entice people to go from whatever else they're doing to come watch you do what you're doing. And the way you do that is you get them interested in what's going to happen. If you're talking about how your opponent isn't a good wrestler, all right, why would they want to come see somebody fight somebody who's not good? In their mind, it's not going to be an interesting fight because clearly that guy can't fight because that guy said he can't. So why should I care? Because he's clearly going to win because that guy can't wrestle. Instead, what you want to talk about how is DJ, quick. I get it. You're a hell of a rising star in this industry. I've watched you. I'll admit it. Derrick Zane has sat in the back and watched the tape, seen how you've been on this meteoric rise through the ranks. And yes, Derrick Zane is not small enough a man to admit that you might put just that tiny little bit of fear in his heart. But let's be honest, DJ, your meteoric rise, you have yet to face a titan like Derrick Zane. So the question's really going to come down to this, DJ. Do you trust in the luck, in the skill, in the abilities of a rising star, or do you bank on the absolute solid, written in stone tradition and ability of a guy who's been here longer than most people have even contemplated? See, that sounds a little more interesting than DJ Quick. I don't even know why they put me in the ring with you. A guy like you, you're not even fit to scrape the crap off my boot. Some people might be into the slagging, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to interest everybody to come in. The idea is you want to get people interested in what you're doing. The second reason why you don't want to do that is if you talk a bunch of crap about how this guy sucks and he beats you, what does that make you? You can denigrate, you can talk down to people, but never exactly. You don't want to look like a chump at the end of the day. You don't want to cut your opponent at the heels by talking about if they suck, because that will hurt you ultimately in the end. You want to get people interested in what you're doing. So I would never suggest doing what you suggested or what your question was. I wouldn't, but I'm not everybody. Yeah. Again, anything I'm telling you, these are merely suggestions for what I believe can help you improve, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm right. If you feel like you can make that, this goes to anybody that's going to be watching this video afterwards. If you feel like you can get away with that, maybe you can, but it doesn't necessarily help your product at the end of the day, is what my opinion is. If anything, it hurts it. And then to come back to that whole thing about the two sides of a coin. In a wrestling match, in a wrestling story, there's a face, there's a heel, ideally. There can be heels versus heels and face versus faces. But even in that scenario, somebody needs to be more face than the other or more heel than the other. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there's no such thing as the tweener. There is a term that is referred to as the over heel, wherein the heel is doing heelish things to heels, but that doesn't make them a good guy. They're still an asshole. It just happens to be the asshole that you're cheering for. And unfortunately, one of the hottest periods in the industry created this concept in everybody's head that there is such a thing as a tweener when there isn't. Everybody just happened to be cheering for Stone Cold Steve Austin because they thought it was cool, but he was still being a heel, and so was The Rock, and so were all those guys. There's a wrestling match is essentially an argument. It's a fight. How many sides are there to a fight? There's two. There's two people in a fight, 2 points of view, two sides of the argument. Wrestling, in its storytelling capacity, and this brings us back again to psychology, is ultimately a passion play. You are telling a story through physical interaction and some speaking on a stage. Somebody's got to be a good guy. Somebody's got to be a bad guy. Somebody has to win ultimately. Somebody ultimately has to lose. Ideally, you want the face to be the one that wins at the end of the day because you want to go home on a high note. Some people are weird and they think it's edgy and cool to go home on a bummer. That's fine, but that doesn't mean that every match has to be that way. But you kind of ultimately want the good guy to win. If we're using old school Hollywood terms, it would be like from the westerns. It would be white hat, black hat. If you don't know what that means, anytime you're watching an old black and white western, if you saw a guy right on the screen wearing a white hat, immediately you knew that's the good guy. That's the hero. And then almost immediately after you establish who the hero is, you're going to see a guy wearing a black hat. That's the villain. Now you know who to root for, who to not root for. Bing, bang, boom. Never said that wrestling was not, on the nose, blunt with its, subtlety. All right. Any other questions? And it could be, what did I have for breakfast today or whatever. Just whatever questions you got, throw them at me. uh, I'd much rather take bumps in Second Life. That much is certain. It hurts a lot less. Um, I'm not going to get too deep into it. My issues with the community stemmed from my perception of the community wanting to recreate the worst parts of the real world side of the business. Again, I don't want to get into it. That's my bag. I got to deal with. Um, it would be nice if the community could find ways to address problems with other companies and get around it. But I had to run my head against a wall many, many times trying to run shows and dealing with the flakiness. And again, this is my own problems. I'm not going to try and say that this is something everybody's got to do. The joke I made with Vince was that I had to leave the community for the community to finally start working together. So I don't know. Um, I'm not really this time going out of my way to try to engage with the community. This what I'm doing right now was me being asked very nicely by Vince and more importantly Danny Thunder to do something for the community. I don't hate the community. I'm just not really like trying to engage with it. Again, my own issues. I'll get over that eventually. I'm having fun because I'm not running anything. I'm not booking. I'm not trying to wrangle a bunch of egos together. I do my thing and then I go away. And that I'm gonna out him, but it's the what I refer to as the David Hawk actor school of Zen, like dealing with everything by not being involved. So I do my thing and then I go away and then I don't got to deal with everybody's nonsense, and that makes me happy. Oh God, that's easy. Again, it goes back to your question of should you talk about if your opponent isn't a good wrestler. Cheap heat is just going for the easy boo. This crowd is full of nothing but ugly ass women who can't keep their teeth clean or their faces free from facial hair. You know, yeah, that's going to get a boo clearly, but it's not. It's not good, you know, just makes you look like a dick. Now, if the character is meant to be a dick, there's ways to do that without looking like a complete and total asshole. Um, the Derrick Zane persona was kind of crafted to be a certain kind of way. And a lot of people will go, well, you're just trying to be The Rock. No, I'm not. Specifically, this voice is not a voice that can be taken seriously. If someone were to talk to you in this cadence and in this style in real life, you would probably look at them as if they had a third eye in their forehead. I specifically do that as Derek. One, it sounds like I'm talking louder. I'm really not. I'm just pronouncing my words. I'm slowing down my cadence to overpronounce my words because then it sounds like I'm talking down to you. So that is a way to needle at you to annoy you to not like Derek Zane. Then I'll try to throw in big words to make myself sound smarter than I might actually be, because that's another little thing that'll annoy you. Everything is designed, again, back to psychology, designed to be a good heel, to be a nuisance, an irritant, an annoyance. You shouldn't want to root for me. Now, when I'm working over heel, I'll say some ridiculous shit to make you chuckle so that, all right, he's an asshole, but he's a humorous asshole, so I'll root for him. But at the end of the day, still an asshole. Yes, Dwight, that is true. There is a lot more fun in just performing than trying to work behind the scenes. That is the crux. So be patient with your management, even when they're annoying. I've been on both sides of that coin. I've been the annoying management, and I've been dealing with the annoying management. If you're annoyed with a situation, try to work with management, but understand that you have worth in your own like mental well-being. So if you can't come to a resolution, don't just burn bridges. Just say, all right, it's not working out. I'll finish out whatever engagements I've got, but then I'm going to go find a solution somewhere else. Because then it leaves it open for you potentially coming back to wherever you were if situations change. The worst thing you can do is just go, fuck this place, fuck all of you, fuck everything, and kaboom, and then nobody wants to work with you again. So, I did that. That got me like 7 years of just not dealing with any of you people. Granted, that was my own choice, but 7 years away gave me a little more perspective. Like anything happens over time, you get older and your opinions change on things. But ultimately, if you're in a situation with a promotion and you feel like it's not getting resolved through management, that happens. Just say, all right, clearly this is not the time or place for me. I'm going to try my luck somewhere else. Let them know this is not a personal thing. I'm just going to go ahead and cut ties now. If you need me to put somebody over on my way out, more than happy to. I'm going to go try over here. Because again, it leaves the door open for you to potentially come back. All right, we got a little bit more time. Again, I don't want to bump up against the charity event. So let's go for at least another 15-ish till about 12:45. So any questions? Any more questions? Questions, comments, theories, conspiracies, acronyms, poems, speeches, anything? All right, from Paul, as far as promos, it's important that you do your best, that you do the best you can do to actually believe what you're saying. Yes. Um, absolutely, it's important to, especially if you're a heel. If you're cutting a promo as a heel, so promos between heels and faces should break down thus. If you're a face, everything should be external. Everything you're doing should be about the audience, should be about the crowd. You're winning this belt not because you want to win it for yourself, but you're winning it. You're getting this title to be an example for kids, to be an example for the people in the audience that, you know what, I may be holding this belt, but you're the ones that are the champs. I'm holding this in your stead. It is your strength. It is your emotions. It's your cheers that fuel me. This is about me being here for you, right? That is the face. The face, people call faces being dull and boring because you don't get to say really edgy, fun, cool things. But at the end of the day, not everything's about being edgy and cool, goddammit. Sometimes you have to be lame because that's what the story requires. You have to be a face. You need a face. And that is the thing. You got to be a good guy. The heel is internal. Everything that the heel does is about them. So when a heel cuts a promo, the heel must absolutely, positively, 120,000% believe whatever bullshit is coming out of their mouth, even when everything in subjective reality says it is not. As a heel, Derrick Zane is going to tell each and every one of you little brain nose picks that the sky is green and grass is red. Because Derrick Zane knows better than you, because Derrick Zane is bigger, smarter, better looking, and richer than any of you will ever be in 6 lifetimes. Because you don't want to agree with the heel. You want to force the crowd to not agree with you. So, believe it 1,000% with your chest, even when it is absolutely wrong, especially because it's wrong. Because that is another way you will get a crowd to be annoyed with you. Because if you're a heel, you want them to hit the boo button. That should be your goal. Be booed the moment you appear on the stage. Be booed the entire time you're walking down to the ring. Be booed the entire time you're in the ring. If you're in a match and you've got a face that's building up some heat, you should immediately grab, eye rake them, throw them to the ground, and put them in a rear chin lock. If we have one, I still don't know if anybody's made a rear chin lock. If you haven't and you're watching and you're a move maker, make a goddamn rear chin lock. We need one. Slow the flow of the match down. Slow it way down. Put somebody in like a really dumb submission hold. Like just take all the air out of the match. That is the point of the heel. Take away what the crowd wants so that when the face fights back, oh shit, they get into it. Because yay, something's happening that we want to have happen. Yay. Again, psychology. Dwight says titles, in his opinion, should be more often be used as story. Yeah, well, they are. I've said this before. I'll say it again. The title, a wrestling title, is paradoxically the most important thing in wrestling while being the least important thing in wrestling. It's important because audiences think it's important, and you're putting it on the guy that you believe can drive the narrative the best. Usually in independent wrestling, which I kind of consider most of SL wrestling to be, you put it on the guy that you rely on to show up the most. A lot of times, because people just don't show up. It's sad, but kind of true. So you put the belt on the guy that you know will be there. But yeah, belts are meaningless. Belts are everything. They are meaningless and everything all at the same time. They are a paradox. But your performance should not be dictated by your want of a title. You should be just worried about putting on a good match, and then titles will sort themselves out. Ziza says, speaking of titles, I've noticed that certain people are always have to be the title, and yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you can't get away. You can't get away from ego. It is what it is. There are just some people who, fuck it, I'm just gonna say it. Some people just miss the plot. They don't get it. It's not about them. It's about the show. It's about the show. It's about everybody else that's putting on the show, and it's about putting on a show that the crowd will give a rat's ass about. But I don't know. I don't know if it's some people just didn't get enough pats on the back as kids or love and affection. They missed the point. It's not about the belt. The belt, like I said, Ultimately, the belt is meaningless. Me personally, me, the guy talking to you, not Derrick Zane, the actual person. I have held a belt. I've been a tag champion. Would you like to know how I was a tag champion? We got the belts for the tag division fresh that day at a show. Andre, the guy who trained me, looked at the belts and said, "Man, I really want to be a tag champion." He then looked at Robbie Phoenix, one of our other guys, and said, "Hey, Robbie, you want to become tag champions?" Robbie said, "Yeah, that's what's up." He went, "Cool." He looked up at me and my buddy Bobby. He said, Bob, you guys are going to be the tag champions. We're going to take the belts off of you tonight." That's how I became a champion. That's how fucking meaningless it is. But it counts. I walked out one time as tag champion, so I count it. And that is true. That was the show that I was in that had Mil Mascaras in it. It was a Lucha Libre show in Oxnard, California. I'm pretty sure somebody's got it on video. I'll have to really ask around to try and find it. That was many moons ago. But that is how meaningless titles are. All right, we got about 5 more minutes, so I think one more rant. Okay, so thank you for coming, DJ. Uh, did 321 days of UFW Hardcore Champ in my second year. This will be. Oh, okay. That wasn't really a question, just more of a statement. Yeah, I mean that's a booking issue. Could have been that the booker just didn't have anybody else in mind at the time. That's a backstage thing. I can't really speak to that. Can't really say if there's a universal answer for that. Just sometimes that's what happens. Mike Rain, the Underground Empire Wrestling Western Pacific champion, he held that belt for Jesus Christ, better part of a decade. Just because there was a chunk of time where we couldn't run shows because we just didn't have the money. We never took the belt off of him, and he would defend the belt at other promotions. So we just incorporated it. We just started claiming that he was the longest reigning champion of the modern era because you can spin any bullshit you want. And you know what? I'm going to leave it here on this statement. In professional wrestling, if you're a booker, if you're a performer, and you feel like you've written yourself into a corner, you haven't. Because there's one simple, absolute gospel truth. Reality is whatever we tell the audience it is. If you feel like you fucked up something, you haven't. Just got to find a way to unfuck it through some kind of razzle dazzle and nonsense. Case in point, I was doing a match with Kurt Bombastic at a promotion long gone. We had Eric Stewart demand on voice that the two of us stop fighting at the side of the ring. He even said the next guy that throws a punch is getting suspended indefinitely. Kurt punched me and fucking he messed up and suspended Derrick Zane indefinitely. And then we realized after the fact, oh, Eric screwed up. To which I said, no, he didn't. There's a fix. I'm just going to Mr. America this bullshit and show up with a mask. And we found a way around the problem. There is always a way around whatever problem you think has arisen. You just got to be clever and find it. It's out there. All right. So about 2 more minutes before I'm going to officially put a bow on this. I will thank those of you who came, either on time or late. I'm not going to say who is who. You know who you are. You should think about that deeply. In shame. Shame on you. Naughty, naughty. Can't see it, but I'm doing the finger waggy while scraping the finger on the other top. For those of you who will watch this, again, I think the intention is for me to do this once a month. I'll try to think up another topic to kind of just pontificate about. But mostly it's just, again, for psychology, it boils down to, does this make sense? If yes, should I do this just because it makes sense? If yes, do it. If there's a no in those questions, don't do it. If it doesn't make sense, don't do it. If you don't have to do it just because you can do it, don't do it. Less is more. All right. So thank you again for coming. Thank you for those who are going to be watching this on YouTube. Again, we'll try to do this again next month. And fucking more of you show up next time so that I don't feel like I'm out here just kind of, with my thumb up my ass. Catch y'all later.